Yes, welcome. My name's Reddan. I'm coordinator with the Darebin Creek Management Committee, and very excited today to invite you along. And thank you very much for joining this at short notice. As you can appreciate, it's quite challenging in this COVID environment trying to work out the logistics of how we can do it safely within the rules. And also at the other end of the scale, we've got this time frame of platypus breeding habits where we're likely to find them in the Darebin Creek. But in some ways, this is actually beneficial because we've only got 10 sites and we can only have 2 people tending to each of those sites. So we've probably got the right amount of people for the job. So firstly, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung, and the elders, past, present and emerging. We're very excited to work with the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung on a series of developing projects in healing country on the Darebin Creek, and looking forward to those coming up soon. We'll involve some cultural burning, and there will be community engagement as a part of that in partnership with La Trobe University, Melbourne, and Melbourne Water. So that'll go for 3 years. So that's another thing to look out for. This project on surveying platypus has come about through the Community Environment Program, a federal government program, grants, and sponsored through Cooper. This is one of 3 grants that we're working on, 3 projects. They've all been stalled this year, like much of everything else. But coming up soon, there will also be some projects that you can get involved in on monitoring water bugs and their role as food for platypus and ricali, and also a weed watch program. So look out for those. We'll keep you informed of those. And yeah, so without further ado, I think I'd like to move on to introduce our guest, Josh Griffiths from eDNA. He's got 10 years experience, over 10,000 hours working in the field, monitoring fauna, and he has become a leader in this area of eDNA because of particularly, well, it's cost effective for monitoring, but particularly because it's less intrusive with fauna, catching and releasing. So it's pretty exciting technology, and really looking forward to see what comes out of this project and your involvement. So yeah, you're probably wondering who eDNA is and what she's got to do with platypus. So yeah, I'll hand over to Josh, and he's going to start with platypus biology and threats, habitat assessment, and then we will go into the sampling procedure after that. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end. So until then, if you can just, you all know your Zoom etiquette, and you've got yourself on mute, so that's great. So thanks everyone. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Danny. Yeah, look, pretty excited to have this project underway. I think Danny and I first spoke about this probably over 12 months ago now, and got delayed for various reasons. So really excited to get this underway. I will share my screen with you, which will hopefully work. So as Danny mentioned, I've been lucky enough to work on platypus for over a decade now. I think I'm up to about 13 years or more. A lot of that has been trying to understand how populations are going. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's so challenging for this species. But first of all, I just want to remind us all how amazing these little critters are and how lucky we are to have them virtually in our backyard still in Melbourne. So, of course, we're very familiar with what a platypus looks like, but I always sort of like to think back to the first European settlers that came to, the first people to see something like a kangaroo that we are so familiar with and sort of take for granted. And I sort of put the platypus as the top of our sort of weird and wonderful list. And there's a very famous story that, so the way that they used to study our animals was to shoot them, spear them, trap them, kill them, and then send them back to Europe, either the skins or the pickled bodies or whatever it might be. And then the biologist in Europe would study these animals and classify them and try to work out what they are. When the platypus first got sent back there, there's a very famous story of I believe it was a French biologist that took to the skin with a pair of scissors to try to see where the bill was stitched onto the body. Apparently it was commonly done at the time. There was a lot of prestige in finding these fantastical creatures around the world. But even after it was accepted that platypus was a real creature, this weird duck mole existed, it took another 100 years before our white biologists anyway understood how they reproduced. Of course, our indigenous people knew it for hundreds of thousands of years, but unfortunately no one was listening to them at that stage. So now, of course, we know that they belong to a very special group of mammals called monotremes. These are the egg-laying mammals. And so out of the 5,500 mammal species in the world, there's only 4 or 5 monotremes. And even within that group, platypus is on its own. The others are all echidna species. So this is what a platypus egg looks like. In fact, we know so little about their eggs that this isn't even a platypus egg. This is actually an echidna. Looks exactly the same. They're about the size of a 5-cent piece. And when they hatch, they look like these little pink jelly beans. So a bit of background on platypus biology. I'm sure a lot of this stuff you're familiar with, but it's very relevant when we start talking about their threats. Of course, they're a semi-aquatic mammal. That in itself makes them quite unique, but they are completely dependent on aquatic ecosystems for their survival. And unfortunately, aquatic ecosystems are some of the most threatened around the world. They're also, and I should say they're supremely well adapted to their aquatic lifestyle. So sometimes they're thought of as this sort of primitive throwback of a mammal, but they're actually incredibly well adapted to their environment. Now, these animals are primarily nocturnal. It's not unusual to see one during the day, but they tend to spend about 3/4 of their time active at night. And that in itself makes them quite difficult to monitor. But if you do see one in the middle of the day, it's certainly not a sick or injured animal. They are just very adaptable about their behaviour patterns. Now, one of the other things that they require when they're not active in the water foraging, they require burrows. They rest in burrows during the day and to reproduce. So having those nice stable earthen banks is another one of their critical habitat requirements. Now, there's also quite a lot of size variation in them. So like a lot of mammals, the males are bigger than females, tend to be about 50% bigger. And these figures here are sort of the typical Victorian sizes for the species. But there's also a latitudinal gradient. So up in northern Queensland, which is their farthest north of their range, an adult male is only about 1 kilo and 30 centimetres long. They're little toy platypuses. Whereas in Tassie, where I first started researching platypus, I caught the largest one on record, which was just over 3.6 kilos, 66 centimetres long. Looked like a small furry crocodile when I released him. He was huge. Now, platypus are also very slow to reproduce. Now, this is really important when we talk about populations that are declining and then have to recover after a disturbance. So they're not like rodents or rabbits that just kind of have these boom and bust phases in their population. They're a very slow reproducing species. This is actually breeding season in Victoria at the moment. And typically the females will start disappearing into their burrows in a couple of weeks, which is why we're trying to get this eDNA survey done relatively soon. They'll lay 1 or 2 eggs in their burrow, typically only raise 1 young per season. So they only breed once a year, only raise 1 young generally, sometimes 2. And most females won't breed every year. So there's only about 30% of any of the breeding age females that are actually reproducing any year. So they do take a while for populations to recover. Juvenile mortality is also typically high as well. Now, their other critical requirement is that they need food. So they eat a lot of aquatic macroinvertebrates. So that could be insect larvae, small crustaceans, worms. They'll even take small fish or frogs. They're really not fussy. They'll eat whatever's there, but they do require a lot of food. So that's one of their key things in their environment. And when we're talking about how we're improving habitat for platypus, most of it is targeted towards how are we improving our systems for bugs. People just aren't that interested in bugs, so it's much better to say it's for platypus. Now, the other thing that makes them really unique is that they're one of only a few venomous mammals in the world. So the males have these venomous spurs on their hind legs. During breeding season, their aggression increases, their venom production increases, and apparently an adult male will have enough venom to kill a small dog. So very painful to humans, causes excruciating pain, lots of swelling, and things like morphine simply don't affect it at all. So no, I haven't been spurred, and I'm really not as much. I am a little bit curious, but I'm trying to avoid it as much as possible. So what are the things that are threatening them? So obviously, being dependent on aquatic ecosystems, they're vulnerable to anything that's going to affect those systems. And you know, the big thing lately, the first 10 years of this decade, we had the millennium drought, the worst on record. A lot of our waterways that were nice, healthy, flowing waterways turned into something like this, fairly stagnant ponds. They're disconnected. So you lose habitat. There's not as much water around, so you lose habitat. You lose connectivity along waterways or between waterways. It reduces the amount of bugs. It impacts as riparian vegetation. So not surprisingly, drought has a significant impact on them. The other thing is that we're also dependent on water. And so it puts things like platypus in direct competition with us for a limited resource. And not many species win that battle, unfortunately. So we modify waterways to suit our needs. So we build structures like this, create big reservoirs. That drastically changes flow regimes, and it's also a massive barrier. So any platypus trying to go up or downstream there hits a big concrete wall. He can't go visit his girlfriend further upstream or vice versa. So it fragments populations as well as changing their habitat. We also construct a lot of these in the surrounding catchment. So there's farm dams. If anyone looks at an aerial photograph, there are thousands of these in every catchment, particularly through agricultural areas. Again, changing flow regimes, stopping water going into our waterways, generally reducing the amount of water available, reducing habitat and habitat quality for platypuses. And then, of course, we directly extract water from our waterways as well. Now, in urban areas, there's a particular problem. It's called the urban stream syndrome. And basically, it's due to the fact that we're concreting all of our surrounding catchments. So when it rains, we get a massive influx of water into our urban waterways. This is particularly relevant for something like Darebin Creek. So the solid line here is what the flow regime would be expected under a sort of semi-natural scenario. So after rainfall, you get water infuses into the ground, slowly seeps into the waterway, and you get this gradual increase and then a slow decline. In urban waterways, you get a much more rapid increase and a much earlier increase. The peak is much higher, and then it drops off just as quickly. So you don't get that extension of flow. You get massive peaks in that flow, and there's a lot of issues that come from that. There's the physical problem of just that volume of water causing erosion. It can physically strip things like macroinvertebrates out of waterways. Even things like platypus and fish will get pushed out under high flow. It brings a lot of pollutants and litter and things into waterways. So this is a particular problem in urban streams and one of the key degrading factors in our urban streams. Now, probably the other major issue that platypus face is loosely termed under habitat degradation, and a lot of it is due to clearing vegetation. So it might seem a little strange that vegetation around waterways has such a big impact to what happens in the waterways, but so this is what I typically would call a healthy platypus habitat. Lots of riparian vegetation, native riparian vegetation, overhanging veg on the water, lots of woody debris and organic matter in that waterway. You can't see it very well in this photo here, but the bottom of this waterway is all different sized rocks, so cobbled rocks and pebbles. Now that all provides nooks and crannies for biofilm and then macroinvertebrates. Same with all this woody debris and organic matter. That's what I would call a healthy waterway. And then we tend to convert them to things like this. So obviously this is an agricultural landscape, but we clear all that vegetation away. As a result, you get these massive erosion events. All that sediment then goes into the waterway, smothers the benthos, and you end up with that sort of anoxic sludge in these kind of waterways, which basically nothing lives in. You then get extreme fluctuations in water temperature, which degrades it further. You can get stock access, which just exacerbates the problem. So that's really poor habitat. And it's a similar situation in urban waterways as well. Slightly different, but the same sort of problem. Now, other issues that we see at a more local scale, certainly predators. Platypus didn't really evolve with any predators, and they're not a major issue for them, but once their habitat starts drying up and they have to cross land, they're really vulnerable to things like foxes and dogs. Litter in urban waterways. In all my surveys, we get about 10% of our platypus that are entangled in some form of litter. These guys are really good at getting stuff caught around their neck. The way they forage and their streamlined body means that anything that's an enclosed loop can fit over their head. And I've seen really horrific injuries from simple things like a rubber band or a hair tie. And I just realised I do have another photo coming up that does have some dead platypus. So if anyone wants to cover their children's eyes, that's fine. But it is a very relevant photo. Things like these devices here, which are called opera house nets, designed to catch yabbies and crayfish. They're thrown into waterways, fully submerged, stay there for days before they're retrieved. Of course, platypus eat yabbies, and so as soon as a yabby goes into these sort of nets, it becomes a baited trap for platypus. And unfortunately, this was the result of just 2 nets that were abandoned in a waterway just east of Melbourne a few years ago. These nets are now completely illegal in Victoria. We've managed to get them banned about 12 months ago. Since then, we are yet to record any drownings of platypus in these nets. So it's been a really significant outcome and a great win for them. So, given all those threats that they face, it's probably not hard to imagine that platypuses are facing a bit of an uncertain future and lots of stresses. Now, unfortunately, until recently, platypus weren't really considered under threat at all. They were considered a species of least concern. And that was largely because this broad distribution that you can see here hadn't really changed in the last 200 years. So since European settlement, where a lot of our wildlife has declined dramatically, platypus seem to have escaped that issue. Now, the problem we've got is that within that distribution, we do not have a good way of measuring abundance or population trajectories. And so even though that distribution hasn't changed, we don't know if there's half as many animals as there were or 1/10 of what there were. They could have doubled for all we know. We just don't have any reliable way of estimating those numbers. I can assure you they certainly haven't increased, and we're starting to get more and more information. But this is a real issue to understand their conservation assessment. Also being able to quantify the impacts of those threats, and even when we're trying to manage waterways, are our actions having the effectiveness that we want them to? Now, recently their conservation status got upgraded to near threatened, recognising that we're gathering more data that's indicating they're under a bit of stress, but that doesn't actually offer them any further protection at this stage. So we're still continuing to try to get more information. Now, where we do have good data, we've had long-term monitoring programs in sort of Western Victoria. So this is the Wimmera catchment. If I can get my mouse going. So this is the top of the Grampians here. Horsham's about here. And this is the Wimmera River that flows through here and terminates in Lake Highmarsh. As you can see, a lot of this catchment has been largely cleared. It's very agricultural landscape. These orange dots are the grand total of platypus data that we have in this entire catchment. So this is over 100 years. We've got about 50 or 60 records of platypus. And this is pretty typical of what we've got anywhere. It's very sparse data that we've got to work with. In 2008, we're getting to the end of the millennium drought. The Wimmera River was looking extremely sick. There was real concerns about what was going on with platypuses in this catchment. We did some pretty widespread surveys at that time, and this is what we found. We had one capture in one waterway flowing out of the Grampians. The only reason that platypus persisted in that area was because that section of river was receiving consistent flow because the water was being released from a reservoir up here and then getting diverted to supply Horsham. So that was the only waterway in the entire catchment that had reliable water supply during the drought. And as a result, there's a small population still persisting there. We've been monitoring it very closely since, and it is improving, but it's still a very small, isolated population, and it's the only population that exists in that entire catchment now. In Melbourne, where we have probably the most detailed data on platypuses anywhere, Melbourne Water's had a very long-term monitoring program going on. Now, I've sort of pieced together what I can of historical data in Melbourne area. So just to sort of orientate people, so this is the CBD here with the Yarra River out here and sort of Werribee here, Sunbury. I think this one here might be Darebin Creek, I think. These blue lines represent what I've estimated previous platypus distribution to be like. So around 100 years ago, there's records of high abundance of platypuses at Princess Bridge in the city there. So we know that they were pretty extensive throughout the region. Basically, every major waterway would have had a resident platypus population. This is what that looks like now. Now, we're pretty confident of this. We've got some pretty good data. Not only has that distribution contracted, but you can see we're getting this fragmentation of populations here. And that can be either because of physical barriers like a reservoir. So there's the big Melton Reservoir here that's splitting the Werribee River into two. There's really poor habitat and flows along Deep Creek here, which essentially has isolated a population up the top here. We can see this big urbanised area through here where they're slowly disappearing from, and that's basically contracting up the Yarra system as that urban expansion is happening. And in a lot of these areas, we've not just got distribution data, but we've got long-term trapping records. And so even though I'd say we can't estimate abundance very well, we can look at how our capture rates change over time to get an idea about whether populations are increasing or decreasing. Now, in some areas, we have situations like this where they used to be quite high abundance and now are basically extinct. Most of our areas look more like this, where we've had a significant decline until the end of the drought in 2010. And then we're starting to get evidence of populations recovering. We're getting more reproduction happening. Our catch rates are improving. So not surprisingly, as more rainfalls around the place and conditions are getting better, populations are responding, but it's very slow. So if we overlay that data onto our distribution and just give them sort of a traffic light, you know, red populations are really struggling and green are doing okay. Not surprisingly, all of these small isolated populations are really struggling. And these are the ones that if we don't do something soon, they're going to start disappearing into the future. We've certainly already seen a number of small populations disappear over the last 10 years. So, and when we've got large interconnected populations, not surprisingly, it's pretty happy. They're pretty healthy. And for those that know the Upper Yarra, it's also, the habitat quality is also a lot better. So the reason that we don't have good data is that platypuses are just incredibly difficult to monitor in the wild. So you can't just go out to a waterway and spot them. As I mentioned earlier, they're largely active at night. They're often seen under really poor light conditions or from a distance. They might just look like a stick. They're very easily confused with this guy who's the native Ricali. Magnificent creature, but they do look very similar from a distance. And then, as I mentioned, they're usually active at night. So visual surveys just aren't really effective. They don't have power to really detect change with platypus populations. Traditionally, we've used things like live trappings. So this is what I've spent the last, typically at about 5 or 6 sites along a waterway. I'll spend most of the afternoon getting these set up. They then have to get checked all through the night. So it's a very long, labour-intensive process, and also has low sensitivity. So we know that where we go to waterways, where we've got fairly low abundance of platypuses, I'll often not catch anything at all. So low sensitivity and a lot time and labour intensive. So that's why we sort of came up with this new technique called environmental DNA. Now, this has come about in the last probably 5 to 10 years, as our genetic techniques are getting better, more sensitive, we're now able to detect these tiny traces of DNA that are left behind in the waterway. So every species is shedding DNA. I'm sure everyone here has seen a CSI type show where the detectives go to the crime scene and swab for DNA. Essentially, we're doing that same thing for wildlife populations now. So we can detect pretty much any species that leaves DNA behind. As was mentioned before, one of the key advantages of this is it's non-invasive, ethics permits. The sampling methodology is really simple, which means we're able to get people like yourselves involved really easily. It can be really cost effective to implement over large scales, and we currently are doing a project that's covering, I think it's about 500,000 square kilometres, the largest platypus survey that's ever been done. And I guess in terms of a monitoring technique, the key thing about this is that it's really sensitive. So if platypus are present, we have a very high probability of detecting them. And then because the DNA persists in the waterway for a few days and also disperses with the flow, we can pick things up over a longer time and spatial period than if you're going out and looking for a platypus, they have to be there right in front of you at that particular time. Whereas with eDNA, we can pick them up if they were there several days ago or sort of 100, 200 meters upstream. So a lot of advantages of this technique. And just to give you an idea, I'll just quickly run through this. So I talked about sensitivity. If we want to have high confidence of detecting a platypus, so this is our probability of detecting, and this is the number of surveys that I have to do with my live trapping technique. I've got to do about 6 to 10 all-night surveys to reach that 95% detection rate. With eDNA, I can go and take a couple of water samples, run a couple of replicates in the lab, and I get about a 97, 98 detection rate. So really high probability that if they're there, we're going to pick them up. And conversely, if we don't pick them up, we've got very high confidence that they're not there. So reduces that false positive and false negative issue that you can have with a lot of techniques. To give you an idea about what we're able to do with this technique, so again, back in the Melbourne region, this is what a typical year of trapping looks like for me. It's about 100 sites, 25 or 26 waterways across the area. Orange is where I've picked up platypus in this year and white is where I haven't. Most of these sites are visited twice per year. So these areas here where I know platypus exist, we didn't catch any in that 12 months. So our sensitivity is quite low. With eDNA, we can do something like this. So this took us about 3 months to do. We basically mapped platypus distribution throughout the entire Melbourne region. 350 sites, 125 waterways, and for a lower monetary investment than what the trapping was going to take. So you can kind of see the value of what you can do with this technique. And then because you've got so many sampling sites, you can overlay other data like stream condition, you can look at flow, you can look at riparian vegetation, and you have power to do statistical analysis because you've got so many sites. So drilling in quickly on our local area. So this is Darebin Creek here with the Yarra. These green markers are sightings that have been reported to us over the last few years. So we do get a few sightings along Darebin Creek, even sort of one up the top here, but we certainly get a lot through the Yarra region. So we know that the Yarra has a permanent population. We've done some eDNA surveys over the last few years in Darebin Creek. Here's the results here. So we typically tend to pick them up in this lower section, very occasionally up a little bit further. So this was in 2016 and 2018, I think it was. So again, pick them up in the lower section. So we do have some data. We know that platypus use the creek, but there doesn't seem to be a resident population at this stage. So I guess the challenge for this creek is to be able to improve conditions so that we can get pretty consistent recolonisation from the Yarra. So we also did some more complicated analysis with our eDNA work a few years ago to pick up a lot of other species. And just for your interest, these are the kind of things that we've picked up in Darebin Creek. So all the starred ones here are actually introduced or domestic species. So unfortunately, there's a lot of those around the place, but we're still getting a few native fish. Obviously, a lot of birds are using the region around the creek, and then a few sort of reptiles and mammals as well. So just to give you an overview about what we've detected in the creek previously. Finally, I guess, what can we do for platypus? I guess first and foremost is doing what you're doing, finding out what the problem is. We can't make change unless we're educated about what's going on. So first and foremost, this is probably the most important thing that you can do. Getting involved with revegetation programs, weed removal, you know, things like what friends of groups, land care groups, if you can offer up a day or you know, 1 day a year to help out in one of these programs, it's amazing what a small group of people can do for their local waterway. Being careful about our fishing. I don't want to stop people fishing in our waterways. The more that we use our waterways, the more we're going to value them. But obviously just doing the right thing, not leaving rubbish, not leaving fishing line behind, and certainly not using those illegal yabby nets. Same with the planting days. Helping out with those cleanup days is really important. And then obviously being conscious about the waste that we produce. So I'm probably preaching to the wrong people here, but you know, being conscious of when we're in supermarkets, buying products with low waste. When we are throwing stuff out, simple things like cutting through loops can be really important. So even if they do blow out of your bin and get into waterways, they're completely harmless. Use less water is a bit of a no-brainer. And I haven't talked much about dogs, but they are a bit of an issue for platypuses. So just being careful with your dogs around waterways and keeping them under control. And the other thing is we have such little data on platypus that every time you know, you see one, it's potentially useful information. So there's a website that's a public repository for all that. You can see what's been seen in your area. There's a smartphone app that we've developed recently. So yeah, if you can log your sightings on that, if we can get enough of that data together, it paints a really important picture. And I'll leave it there. I'll give a bit of time for people's questions, and then we'll go through, maybe I'll do a demonstration of the water sampling and the habitat assessments that we're going to do. So how do you want to do the questions, Danny? Should we just, I don't know how many people are online, maybe people can just... Yeah,
we've got there's 15 people in total, but maybe if you just want to put in the comments if you've got a question, and then we'll go to you just in order of who gets the commenting first. But thanks, Josh. It was yeah, really comprehensive. Really enjoyed that. It was fascinating, and I think the only thing we didn't cover was the cloaca, which is just a word I like to say. But are there any comments or questions?
I think I've actually got a picture of the cloaca.
Oh, there we go. I think you did such a fantastic job. There's not much more to ask. But
look, if I can't spend 30 minutes talking about platypus, I should probably give up. There is a question here: is La Nina likely to have a positive impact on populations? Look. More rainfall is obviously going to be better than not enough. We certainly do have, in urban areas in particular, rainfall can be a problem just because of that flashy flow. But I would certainly take La Nina over El Nino any day. I think once we start getting into drought and you know, all the climate change predictions are saying that we're going to get less rainfall, longer and more extensive droughts and more frequent droughts in this part of the country. You know, these guys are going to be able to cope with a little bit of drought, but when they're sort of 10 years and if they're repeat again and again, we're just going to see populations eroding away. And yeah, I guess that's the concern. So certainly more rainfall can only be a good thing, I think. And it'll also stop us taking as much out of waterways as well.
Yeah, we understand, we've had the discussion that for the Darebin and a lot of the urban creeks, the biggest issue is the stormwater runoff. and it's very difficult to retrofit that, very expensive to try to slow that down. But you know, out of this project, certainly a long-term vision for DCMC is to do whatever we can to improve the conditions of the creek for the platypus and indeed all the other fauna and flora.
You're right. Retrofitting is really difficult. The area where I guess the most impact can be made is with new developments and making sure they're following water sensitive urban designs. But things like, you know, providing incentives for people to install rainwater tanks, rain gardens set up in your house. Again, it's that last message that I had, that small things multiplied by enough will make a difference. So, you know, if every second house has a small rainwater tank that they're then using for their garden, that's reducing that runoff, but also reducing our reliance on the water that we're pulling out of our waterways. So, you know, all the things like that can make a really big difference. There's a cool program that Melbourne Water has been doing. It's around smart tanks, and it's installing these rainwater tanks on buildings, and then they're connected somehow that are then releasing water over time. So instead of getting that big flush of water into waterways, it's being captured, a percentage of it's being captured in these waterways and then getting released over the following week. So it's sort of replicating that more natural flow in waterways.
Got some more questions coming through.
A couple of other ones. Can you recommend any advocacy groups that are pushing for more efficient grey water use? No, James, I can't. Look, I find it amazing that it does my head in that we flush our drinking water down toilets. I've actually just bought a house that has a grey water system that I'm really excited about. But look, I couldn't sort of point you in the right direction of any advocacy groups, unfortunately.
Josh, do you mind if I jump in for a second on the advocacy question?
Yeah, please do.
Hi, I'm Eloise. I work in environmental and heritage advocacy with the National Trust. And I don't know if exact groups that advocate for that kind of thing, but there are one thing that you can do either personally or in a group is advocate for councils to enact changes in the planning scheme. So if there's a new development, they have to provide certain environmental offsets or things like porous pavements or rain gardens. So that's a broader way, personally, that I think can make a difference rather than just encouraging individual action, to encourage councils to actually write that into the planning scheme.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, good point. And yeah, it comes back to that ability to influence, I guess, new developments. Because yeah, I think one of the challenges with existing urban areas is you need that separation in grey water and drinking water. And I think the infrastructure is not really there to do it over large scales, as I understand it.
Yeah, I know that at the top of the catchment in Wollert, the new developments there, they have got that the two-pipe system going in. So it's good to see those changes are coming through with some of the new developments. But you're absolutely right, we've got to keep. They're not going to do that without that engagement and gentle encouragement from the community.
And I think you've just probably answered Mary's question about new development and what's going to happen to Darebin Creek. Certainly if it's done poorly, it's going to continue to degrade the creek. The issues with flow rates and water quality is going to be exacerbated with more development. But if we can get it done in the right way, there's certainly an opportunity to, at the very least, minimise that impact. And in some instances, you can actually improve conditions if you can sort of manage those flows right. So, you know, we've talked about grey water. Certainly stormwater wetlands can be really effective. Porous pavements was mentioned. So all that kind of stuff, having buffer zones around waterways are really important. So, yeah, I guess it's pushing council to make developers make those changes.
Next one from Angelica. I'm a budding GIS geek myself. Is there any way of getting data on platypus populations from public sources to do some interesting overlays?
So interesting. So a lot of the work that we do is for other organisations. So the data tends to belong to them. So people like Melbourne Water have extensive data sets. They haven't been very good at, I guess, managing those data sets previously. I know that they're currently trying to compile them all and make a public portal. Whether that raw data is going to be available or whether it will just be sort of some sort of display that you can then explore, I'm not entirely sure, but hopefully some of that data will be around. Otherwise, there's data, publicly accessible data on things like the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas and Atlas of Living Australia, which has a lot of the historical stuff. Certainly, if you do play around with some of that data, I'd be interested to see what you come up with. Sophia, platypus is now classified as near threatened. Do you think that should be upgraded? So, interestingly, so a couple of years ago, I worked with some groups to, they used a lot of our data to put in an application to DELP in Victoria. So populations in Victoria seem to be under the biggest stress. It might be that it's also because we've got the best data to show that, but it certainly does seem to be that populations in our neck of the woods are struggling a little bit. So a couple of years ago, an application got put into DELP to have them listed as vulnerable in Victoria. And that was approved by, well, preliminary recommendation from the Scientific Advisory Committee was that, yes, it fit the criteria and it will be listed. It went out for public comments last month, I think, and they've just been contacting me. Apparently there's been one particular group that's been opposing it. So they're just trying to work through that, and hopefully it's not going to hold it up because, you know, I think the idea that we need to do more research is just ridiculous. So look, stay tuned. I've also been working on, so I mentioned briefly that we're doing a very large scale project using eDNA. Some of that data is being used on a national assessment at the moment. So that's going to get submitted probably later this year. And so they might actually get listed as vulnerable nationally as well. That'll certainly improve their protection. At the moment, because they're not listed, they don't get, so if developers are going to be around a waterway, they don't have to consider platypus in their planning at all. As soon as they're listed on any of the threatened species lists, that offers that extra layer of protection, and you know, it can only be a good thing for these little guys. So, and I should say that the issue in Victoria, the data from Victoria was before the bushfires went through. So that area, that East Gippsland area, was probably the sort of platypus mecca in Victoria. It's now just been incinerated, and we're trying to find out what that impact has been. Initial data, we're looking at probably a reduction of around 20% in platypus populations in that area. So that's a pretty significant reduction from a single event. But, you know, it's going to take a while to be able to get some good data on that. So hopefully sort of, you know, next year I'll be able to provide some more information around that. And finally, James, regulatory tools seem like a much better method. Yeah, exactly, James. Yeah. So individuals can certainly do their bits, but until we're making large scale regulatory change, that's when we can make significant impacts over a large scale. That certainly shouldn't stop people from doing their bits. I do think that certainly small groups can do a lot for their local waterway. And as I mentioned, if we can all save 1 litre of water a week, you know, there's 20 million litres of water that we're saving across Australia, and we live in a desert and we're going to have more drought. So, you know, doing simple things like that will make a difference. At the same time, we should be pushing for that regulatory change as well. All right, shall we get into water sampling?
I think so.
Okay. Okay, this is my Darebin Creek model. So I guess one of the great things that we kind of recognised early on with this technique when we were sort of exploring it early days was that water sampling can be done really simply, and it's such a great opportunity to get people engaged. I've done this with school children, I've done it with land care groups, community groups. And so running citizen science projects that actually collect really good data at the same time, which I think often gets missed in the citizen science part of it. The science gets missed, but the engagement side, you know, is happening. So I think this is an opportunity to do both. So we come up with a sampling technique that's really simple. I think they made it simple so that I can do it really. But basically what we're going to do, so everyone's going to get one of these little packs. So this is just a little simple insulated lunchbox. It's going to have your sampling kit, some instruction sheets and habitat assessments. I have thrown in a spare syringe in all these packs. Very occasionally they will break, so there's a backup one. If you don't use them, put them back in your packs and I'll reuse them again if they're not opened. I do hate the amount of plastic waste that's produced, so if we can reuse these, great. And then an ice brick. So when you get your packs, really important, throw these in the freezer because they're not going to be much good unless they're frozen. So basically that's what you're going to get in these packs. So everything that I go through is going to be on your instruction sheet. So there's step-by-step instructions there. But hopefully it will be clear as mud anyway. So the key things that we need to worry about with eDNA sampling, first and foremost, is your safety. Obviously, working around waterways, there can be slippery rocks, there can be steep banks, there will be bees, snakes to watch out for, ants, all these kind of things, swooping magpies. First and foremost, take care of yourself. If you think you can't access the waterway safely, if you can't find a safe place to park, do not proceed. It's not important enough to put yourself at risk. So hopefully most of these sites are going to be relatively easy access, but some people might have knee issues, back issues, whatever it might be. Just use your judgment and play it safe. When we do get to a waterway, because we are detecting tiny traces of DNA, one of the potential issues is contamination. So particularly if we're moving between different sites, if I get water or mud or organic material on my boots and then go to the next site, potentially that all has DNA on it. So we need to minimize that transfer of DNA. One of the key things we do is we don't get in the water at all. So that means that we're not introducing DNA into the water, but also it's a safety issue as well. So hopefully you'll just be able to get to the bank of the waterway and be able to directly access the water straight in front of you. So the other key thing we do is we've got clean equipment for each site. So it's all sterile. So probably a good idea, first and foremost, is just to get everything out of your pack. So each pack will have a syringe. It's going to have a couple of these filters and a pair of gloves, and then hang on to your bag because your filters are going to go back in here. It's got labels, data that you need to fill out, and then this is going to get sent back to us. So first and foremost, what we want to do is label our filters. So you're going to collect 2 filters on each site. So we're going to call them 1 and 2, not surprisingly. Each of your sites will have a site code that Danny will provide to you. So I'm just going to call this one Site 1. And today's date is so for each of your filters, you're going to have your site code there, filter 1 or filter 2, and your date. And then when you're finished, the final thing you're going to do is you're going to record the volume of water that you put through this filter. So you can label both of your packs first up. That's probably the easiest way to go. And then in terms of doing the sampling, so you put on your gloves. Hopefully no one has any latex allergies. So this is to reduce contamination. Also makes you look really sciencey, which is important. I'm actually going to use I'm going to reuse a syringe so it's less plastic. These, they just peel open, so that's really easy. These are completely sterile until you open them, so we try to keep them that way as much as possible. And then all you're doing with this syringe is in your waterway, is fill up your syringe. Now, because we want to record the volume of water that we are filtering, I find the easiest thing is just to adjust these to 50 mils. So I don't know if that's showing up very well, but so I've adjusted that volume to 50 mils for the syringe. These filter packets, the easiest way to open them is just to kind of snap them like that. Now, one of the reasons that we use these filters is that they're fully enclosed. So the only way anything's getting in or out is either end. So as much as possible, try to hold it in the middle. So again, it's trying to reduce that possibility of contamination. And then this fat end of the filter here is just going to screw onto your syringe. So only about half a turn, that's all that's required. That's going to be pretty secure. Very occasionally I get one shoot off, but generally they're going to be pretty safe. And then you're just forcing that water through. So obviously the water I'm using is really clean. The creek may be quite turbid and it will clog up your filter. So that's the process. And then we're just going to repeat that until we can't get any more water through. So again, I'll fill up my syringe, adjust it to 50 mils again, and repeat. And so we just continue until we can't get any more water through there. If the water's turbid, it's going to clog up really quickly. And so in some instances, you might only get 50 mils. If it's clean water, you might get 400, 500 mils. So just continue till you can't get any more. It doesn't need to be an entire syringe. So if you end up with 80 mils or 120, whatever it is, just make sure you keep a record of how much there is. Now, final thing we need to do, there's still some residue water left in that filter. That is going to degrade the DNA that's in there. So the final thing we do is just fill up our syringe with some air, screw it onto the filter and just force those last few drops of water out. There's always going to be a little bit in there, but that'll get rid of most of it. The more water you can get rid of, the better quality this sample will be. And then I'm going to pop it back into the labelled packet and record how much volume I put through it. So this one I got 100 mils. So I've got my site code, the number of my filter, the date, and the volume. And then finally, I'll just fold that top over, pop it into the snap lock bag, and repeat the same thing for my second filter. That'll go into this same bag. And then because I'm really anal about labeling things, I repeat the label on all of these on the bag as well. That then goes back into your cool pack with your frozen ice brick, seal that up. And then we need to get that back to the lab or to Danny. I think we'll talk about that in a minute, about how we're going to achieve that. So again, keeping this cool is stopping the degradation. And then we want to get it back to the lab as quickly as we can. So typically within sort of a day or two, so that we can do the analysis on a sample that's really good quality and we've got our best chance of picking up our species there. So that's it, really simple. Hopefully that made sense to everyone. As I said, the instructions are going to be in those packs as well, which will just step you through things. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about that? Can the pack go in the fridge? Absolutely. The more you can keep things cool, the better. And certainly if it's going to take you a day or so before we can pick those samples up or get them back to the lab, keep them in the fridge. They'll be really stable in the fridge for sort of 3-4 days if need be. but hopefully we'll get them prior to that.
That was very clear instructions. Thanks, Josh.
Oh, and I should say the final thing, make sure you're taking your used syringe and your gloves and any other rubbish with you, obviously. If anyone's got any bright ideas about what these used syringes can be used for, I've just had creek water in them, so they're pretty clean. I've got hundreds of them and I refuse to throw them out. So I just want to find a use for them. So yeah, anyone got any bright ideas, let me know.
So Bex just asked if we're doing 2 sites, should we use a different syringe? So that's a good segue. We've got 10 sites, and currently there's 12 people, and this is where it gets complicated with the COVID rules. So obviously we want to do this in the next week, and I believe Tuesday and Wednesday look favourable for the weather, Josh.
Yeah, so it looks like there's some rainfall that's going to come late on Wednesday. And the issue with rainfall, it's just going to wash a lot of sediment into that waterway and clog up the filters. And so if we can do it before then, hopefully the water will still be flowing. So we're getting transport of DNA, but it's going to be a bit clearer so that we can filter more water. The more water you can filter, the better chance we've got of picking up fragments of DNA in there. So that's sort of what we're aiming for.
Yeah, so we've got, as Josh mentioned, we've got the packs at the Darebin Parklands office. So I might just share my screen now, Josh, and bring up the map of the sites. Okay. So hopefully everyone can see this. So 10 sites, and yeah, with the COVID restrictions, you've got to be within 5 kilometres. I think we all know this now. 5 kilometres of your home and up to 5 people from 2 different households. So with 12 people on the line, so we might have a couple of pairs of people to join in, but this is where we look at the locations. And if we can do that now or after, we'll see how we go. But this is the lowest reach here at Sparks Reserve. And some of these sites have been sampled in the past, as Josh mentioned, but there's 5 that are also new. So how do we want to do this? So we want to just have people nominate for these sites if you believe you're within 5 kilometres of this, and I can put your names against those. And then what we can do, if you can come and, if you're within 5 kilometres of the Darebin Parklands office in Elphington, so here on Smith Street, just here, you can come and pick them up on Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday. Otherwise, if you're outside of that, we can deliver them to. So let's try this. So for this one at Sparks Reserve down near the boulevard, just zooming in. Does anyone want to
Eloise is up for Sparks Reserve?
Yeah, I live quite close to there, so I could do that.
Okay, great. All right, so what I'll do, I'll just put your name next to that.
And the other thing we'll probably do, Danny, is maybe we'll share this Google map with people to make it easy for people to navigate and things like that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that's good. So far, so good. And coming upstream, and we're more likely to actually find the DNA in the southern reaches, aren't we, Josh?
Yeah, typically those, that one that you've just mentioned, and I mean, we've had sightings around Northland before, and I think I've had a positive there previously. So, but yeah, typically the closer to the Yarra, the more likely you are to pick them up.
Okay, so I've got messages coming through. Furthest north for Amelia. Yeah, good point, Therese. Yeah, we prefer that people don't go out alone for OH&S. So even if it's not someone from this group, perhaps someone from your family, from your household. Furthest north, Sparks Reserve. Yep, Eloise got that. James can do anything north of Livingston, near Northland. Well, hey, how about, who wants to do Smith Street? So this is right near.
Yep. Yep.
Yep. Yep. Peter?
Yep.
Great. Okay. Peter. Okay. Who was that north of Livingston?
I can do that. I live close to there.
Sophia? Right.
I'm Sophia.
Got it, Sophia. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm really close to that location as well, so I can do the one north of there, if that's okay.
Simon? Yeah, great. Excellent. This is working well. Thank you. Excellent. And moving north, so where are we? We're just north of Bell here.
Yeah, I can do that one.
Who's that? Sorry?
Oh, well, this is Billy. I'm Billy, but I'm on Renee's thing together.
And then I can go north of that.
Renee? Or you could do that one together then?
Yeah.
Yeah, that'll work. We want to ensure that everyone gets a go here as well. That's a challenge because it is very popular. We've got so many sites. Okay. So where are we here? Near the East Preston Islamic College, Doherty Road.
That one's perfect.
I can
Danny,
do
Amelia.
that.
Sorry.
I'm right off that street there.
I can do that one.
Amelia, was it?
I go for a walk there every day.
So was that Amelia and Beck?
Yeah, and I think Mary as well said.
Oh.
So maybe there's a couple of sites around that area.
Yeah, I'm flexible. I can, anywhere around there.
Okay. All right,
I can go further north if Beck and Mary want that one.
That's okay. Oh, it'd be good if if you can do it together. That would work well if you can find a suitable time. We'll try that.
Beautiful.
Great. And going north up, this is...
I can do that one then, Danny, Amelia.
Amelia, excellent, thank you. This is...
equally convenient.
I could also join in on that one as well. It's right near my house. Regan.
Regan, thank you. That's great.
Thanks.
This is working great.
Yeah. Technology, who knew?
I might have to do it this way next time as well.
So Kirkwood Reserve up near Dunn Street.
Dunn Street.
Anyone like to nominate for that? Say your name, please. Oh, James, great, thanks.
Also me, if possible. Matt.
Matthew.
Yep.
Excellent.
That'll work.
And coming further north, what have we got here? Rathcown. This is near the Rathcown Bridge. And this is one, I did check this with Peter Grenfell, our Ed officer. He knows the creek much better than I have, being new to DCMC. And all these sites, we try to choose the most accessible parts of the creek. He was a little bit unsure about this one, but look, as you go down there, you can walk a little bit further along to get the most easy and safe access that you can.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point, Danny. I should point out to everyone that, like, where the markers are, you don't have to be precisely at that point. Just pick what's safest access. If it's kind of 100 metres in either direction, that's fine. You don't need to be exactly where that marker is. So, get on site and just use your judgment. It's not going to influence the collection adding.
Yeah, great. Okay, so...
That part of the path is closed at the moment. I don't know exactly where they are working on that part of the actual path and the bridge. There are some closures around there.
Oh, right.
I don't know about accessing the water, but there's definitely construction there.
They're doing some more
On
work
the
on
path.
the bridge.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, well, I guess...
Yeah, it's part of the trail refurbishment they're doing. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll check with that one as you get down there. If you can't do exactly there, we'll just move it north or south a little where you can access that. Would someone like to volunteer for this one?
Okay, it's Amelia. I can come out of my other one if there's no one who can get that far north.
Okay.
Yeah. I was closer down near the Latrobe Lakes, if someone else wants to go into that one.
Okay, thank you. We'll leave it for now. I'll change it later.
Hello, can you hear me?
Is that someone?
Yep. Hello, I'm Angelica. I haven't been assigned, but I think I can do it because I live near Sparks Reserve, so I can do it with Eloise.
Oh, okay. Back at Sparks. Okay.
Yeah.
That's right. That was just further south. Let me zoom out. All right. Bear with me. That was this one. Yeah. Abercorn Footbridge. Oh, wait. Yeah.
It was the one right down by the Yarra.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one.
So that was Angelica?
Angelica? Yes.
Angelica. Right. Thank you. Right.
Thank you.
All right. So heading north again. I think this is the northernmost. We got anyone this far north at, what's that reserve? Norris Banks? Can anyone do that one?
Norris Bank is the top of my radius, Amelia. If
Okay.
So whichever. If
we'll put you down for
other
that
ones,
as well.
I'm happy to do northern one.
Okay. Right. Okay. That's it. Thanks, everyone.
Somebody somebody stepped out of the Latrobe Lake area.
Yeah, I can see if you want that one, Mary, feel free. It's Amelia can come out of Latrobe. I'm on other ones, so feel free to go into where I am with Reagan.
Oh, right. Actually, no, I think that's a bit north for me at the moment. Sorry.
Okay.
It's at where the path intersects and goes off to Latrobe. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I can do that one. I can do that one as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh. Can I just say something? Sorry.
Yeah.
If people could take some photos too, it's always good to have some photos. If people take photos of themselves doing these activities for us.
Yeah. Great point.
And send them to Danny or yourself?
Yeah, we work together, so yeah.
Yeah, so
either.
Yes. Has everyone been allocated a site? Has anyone missed out? Ah, good. Okay. All right, that's great. So yeah, we'll share this and
you don't have a name next to the 029 wide DAR one.
Oh, who's that one? Oh, right. Yeah, that's
74.
That's yeah. Okay. Who would like that one?
That was Peter's site.
Yeah.
Oh.
And Wendy.
Oh, it's down here. Yeah. Sorry. Great. All right.
And Wendy.
Yep. And Wendy. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Great. Okay.
There's one on the list there that doesn't have a name.
That one was that's the furthest north one that we were in.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that's them all covered. So thank you. Now the next thing is how we distribute the packs, or is everyone able to come and collect from the Darebin Parklands office here and drop them off again?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's great. That's easy then. And then I'll just bring them over to you in Brunswick, Josh.
Yep. Yeah, just keep once you've got them, let me know. So maybe once you receive them at the office, you can just put them in the fridge, keep them nice and constant and cool. And then when you've got them all, you just pop them over to Brunswick. I'll actually be out of town this week, but I'll be able to coordinate with Farley that you met the other day to meet.
Excellent. And yeah, either Therese or myself will be at the office. So if you want to pick it up on Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday, and then drop it off Thursday, Friday at the latest.
So,
Okay.
Sorry, can I just ask, maybe I missed, is there a specific time and day that you would like us to do it on?
Josh, you're talking Tuesday or Wednesday?
Before sort of lunchtime on Wednesday, because the forecast is saying there's going to be some rain after that. So pretty much any day, Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday morning.
Before the rain.
Yep. So whatever's going to suit you the best, and if you're out there with a partner, you can coordinate what's going to work best for you.
Cool.
Does that time work for everyone?
Yep.
Excellent. Yep. Great.
The only other thing we're going to get people to do, so there's some habitat assessments, which I might just really briefly run through. I'm sure everyone's kind of had enough of Zoom, but I'll just very quickly run through that. So one of the things that we're going to do is do a river health assessment for each of these sites. Let me get my screen back. So in your pack, there'll be a lovely colour version, I think, Danny. You managed to get some printing done?
Yes, yeah.
The challenges of COVID. I can't even get colour printing done at the moment. So, but yeah, so I'll just very quickly run through it with you. So it's fairly self-explanatory. So this is what your habitat sheets are going to look like. There'll be two back to back. And basically it's running through 6 different categories that we know are going to be important for platypus. And not just for platypus, but for basic river health and virtually everything that lives in there. And so I've tried to add some example photos for each different category and a little bit of an explanation. Now, I can almost guarantee that none of your sites are going to line up exactly with any of those categories. So it's a bit of, picking which one suits you the best. But so just to give you an example, so the first one here is bank erosion. And we have them categorized for each variable, so 1 to 5, and then at the end they all get added up to give an overall score. And the idea is that we recognize that there's going to be a bit of variation between different people assessing things, but we can almost guarantee that 2 different people aren't going to go to the same site and one's going to rate it very poor and one's going to rate it excellent. It might just be a category different. And then at the end, it all sort of evens out. So it's designed to kind of cope with a bit of that variation and make it nice and simple that you can quickly do on site really easily. So it's basically just looking at the area that you can see from your site. So it might be sort of 20 meters up or downstream, and just a qualitative assessment. So for the bank erosion one, if we go back to our different habitat variables, something like this is going to have no bank erosion. And so you would rate that as 5, and you can just easily just circle that. That's all you need to do. Whereas this one here, our agricultural landscape, we've got basically erosion along that entire bank there. That's going to be the lowest category that you can get. So that would be very poor. Similar with bank vegetation, those two are going to be at extremes. And I should say that there's 2 vegetation categories. One is bank vegetation, so within sort of 1 metre or 2 of the water. So it's the stuff that's really important in terms of stabilising those banks for burrows. And then there's another category a bit further down, which is verge vegetation, and that's sort of the broader area around the waterway. So we know that there's a bit of a corridor along most of Darebin Creek, so there'll be a little bit of riparian vegetation, but none of it's going to be sort of completely forested. So have a bit of a go at it. this isn't going to be the be all and end all. A lot of it is about getting you guys to sort of recognise the different elements that make up good habitat for aquatic species. And then at a broader scale, we can sort of use these to correlate with our platypus occurrence or not. So, so hopefully it's fairly self-explanatory. Just fill that out when you're on site, put it in your pack with your samples, and send it back with Danny.
Sorry to jump in, but I've just realised that my mic was switched off before when we were talking about the kits. I'm actually just outside the radius of the parklands, and I think Matt might be as well. So how are we going to be able to get those?
Yeah, we can deliver those packs to you and Matt then. In that case, that's fine, because it's a part of our work. So
awesome.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Thanks.
We had the question about when we're open. So generally 9 to 5, if that's all right. We'll be in the office.
James also asked if they can share stuff on social media.
Yeah, that's fine with us. In fact, we'd encourage that. Therese manages the DCMC Instagram account, and it'd be good if you can tag anything in there. Photos would be fantastic.
And if you tag Platypus Spot on Facebook or Twitter, I'll find that as well, and I can sort of like and share as well. So, yep. Great.
Okay, well, I think that's probably most things. But if you have any questions over the next few days, of course, just contact myself or Therese, and we can work through those logistical challenges, dropping things off when we're there, pick it up, drop it off, all those kinds of things. But thanks very much for that talk, Joshua. It was fantastic. Thanks everyone for volunteering, and hope you really enjoy it. And thanks very much for Therese for organising this this week. It's been a tricky time to do these kinds of things, but it's come together nicely. Yeah. So keep an eye out. We will have some more citizen science projects coming up with the water bugs and the weed watch. So we'll keep you informed about those. Watch the Instagram account as well.
Just a quick question, Danny, that's come up on the chat is from Beck. How to exchange info to go in pairs? Are you able to connect people?
Yeah. So long as you're all comfortable with sharing those details, let me know if you're not. We'll use it as a group, and for those people who are working in pairs, we'll connect you over the next couple of days. Okay.
Awesome.
Thanks very much.
Thanks all, and good luck with it. We'll have to touch base again when we've got results, and have another little quick reveal, I guess.
Yeah, that'd be great. All right. Thanks a lot. See you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.